In recent years, the level of offences involving a knife or a sharp object has risen. Young people are especially vulnerable to the increase in violence, and agencies and political leaders want to do more to protect them. The churches in England are also actively engaged with the crisis. Church leaders, including the Archbishop of Canterbury to street pastors, have spoken for the need for the violence to end and for the church to be a part of the solution. What we want to know is what kind of interventions are the church doing, and how do they confront the causes of serious youth violence, especially the role of government austerity? What theological ideas motivate these church groups, and what more needs to be done? Craig Pickney is an expert on serious youth violence. We asked him to define knife crime and identify some of the causes.
What is knife crime? If I use the Home Office definition, it's any criminal offence where a knife is used as a weapon. I think it's important to understand that crime is racialised in this country. So when we talk about knife crime, if you look at the projection of what we see on media, it's always that same character of a young black male that's done something in a street context, whether to do with drugs, whether to do with postcode issues and whatnot. And those types of interactions oftentimes gets declared as knife crime. And I think that's really important, that understanding that the society narrates this idea of knife crime to be a black issue, and also as an impact of that, two things happen. One, the community and those that are involved in issues around criminality and knife crime believe and assume that they are the ones that are involved in knife crime, and they're also the victims of knife crime, and the wider society also believe it as such. So when we had the conversation now, black knife crime has come synonymous with the activity, just in the same way that terrorism is now synonymous with Islam.
Craig identified 3 factors that exacerbate knife crime amongst young people.
I don't believe that young people in society feel safe. And if young people don't feel safe, the question is, well, what are young people doing in order to ensure that they're going to be safe? There was a publication that came out from the British Medical Journal, and they asserted that for every young person within the UK, or in London specifically, the likelihood for them to be stabbed is between 3:30 and 5:30. So we project this information out to the community and tell the society that the likelihood for children to be in danger is that time. But what are we doing as a society to ensure that young people are safe in that period? So what I believe, based on my research, is that young people during that time period are thinking, well, I don't want to get caught up in that same type of scenario, so guess what? I'm going to carry a knife. But not thinking about the fact and the idea of me carrying a knife is going to put me in 2 situations. It's either going to put me in a situation where an individual may stop me, search my pockets, and I may get arrested for that. Or it puts me in a situation where I meet an individual that's got a problem that says, what are you going to do with the knife? And then young people then oftentimes, when I work within the criminal justice system and I meet young men, they say things like, I didn't mean to do it. One of the things that often is asked is, why is there a rise in knife crime? What's different? Because violence is always about. So based on my research, what I'm arguing is that social media is the new variable. The way in which young people are communicating now is at a fast rate. Young people don't call each other no more. They're using Snapchat, they're using YouTube, they're using Twitter, they're using Facebook, they're using all of these different types of social media sites in order to engage in their ideas. On those social media websites, it's also telling a narrative of individuals that are saying that they don't want it to happen to me. So this is what I'm prepared to do. So if you don't want to get caught slipping on the road, you need to arm yourself, you need to look after yourself. Austerity has exacerbated the issue, because if you think of the core agencies that we're engaging with young people, we're talking about the youth service, we're talking about services on the ground that we're working with young people and using youth work as an approach, because youth work works. So now that's been severed, what's now happening is that community organisations or statutory organisations that are in the know-how feel less resourced, and they feel like they can't engage with young people in the ways in which they've been trained and they know how to. So what we find now is that we have this phenomena where young people are just being warehoused. So we're inviting them into buildings, but we're not really giving them anything. So we're trying to keep them off the street for a short period of time, but we can't really engage with their issues.
Fear and social media play important roles, but it seems to me, at this moment, it's austerity that's the driving force. If austerity plays a role, then we need to understand it. We asked Stephanie Denning, a researcher in austerity at Coventry University, to explain austerity and its impact on youth services.
Austerity began in 2009, just as the financial crash and the financial crisis ended. And really, austerity has progressed through the last 10 years. And here we're talking about the most recent period of austerity, recognising that there have been, in the past, other periods of austerity. So key things in the last decade have been things like the 2012-2013 Welfare Reform Act. The introduction of universal credit has been another key reform that took 6 benefit payments into 1 benefit payment. But food banks have seen a direct increase where universal credit has been introduced in the number of people coming to the food bank. Austerity has massively impacted youth services, particularly through cuts to spending on youth services. So we've seen closures of children's centres, closures of Sure Start centres, the reductions in the amount of spending that those that are still running, that they have to run.
Before we take a look at what the churches are doing, we need a framework to interpret their response. The African-American philosopher Cornel West articulates 2 approaches to social crises in deprived communities. The first approach suggests that individuals take personal responsibility for solving social problems. And the second is a structural response, a change in social policy to confront the problems encountered by individuals. In other words, advocacy. West concludes that the best approach is a mix of the 2. How have church groups in Britain responded to the crisis, especially in light of austerity?
We deal with men, women and families who are involved or at risk of involvement with serious youth violence. So we are connected to them in prison, and we're connected to them also in the community. There's something about not having a job. There's something about not having enough money. Austerity is actually, it brings a squeeze in communities that people are now thinking about alternative ways or their way of getting money and funds to service their lifestyle. We start building a relationship with them. We talk to them about themselves. We have a course in prison that we have, it's called the Damascus Road Program, where we have about 13 sessions where we look at violence, anger, family relationships, and how they would look at desistance. The word desistance here means literally termination of criminality or involvement in violence. I describe my work as an enabler, as a befriender, as someone who comes alongside young men, young women who are broken, marginalized, vilified, all the negative stereotyping, and I go alongside them and I walk with them. There's something called an outcome star, which is a model that we use to say you meet the person where they are first. Some of them will need their hands held. Now they may tell you, who are you talking to? You're not my dad. But after a period of being consistent with them to say, you know what, I'm not disrespecting you. And you know what, I would really want you to understand my heart to help you. Some of them, however, are still on it and don't want to be helped. And if they don't want to be helped, you can't help them. And the unfortunate thing is, we've had to bury some of them. And that pains my heart. Building relationship, I would say, would be about 40%. You know, the advocacy work that we do, we're advocate for the young people and their families, not just young, as I said to you, we're family orientated. What is important now, what we're championing, is for the public sector to understand the need and necessity to involve communities and community groups in their construct of interventions, because all the young people we're talking about are from communities. They don't come from outside of space, for want of a better term. They're from communities and they're known by people.
Our biggest programme, if you like, is the SPEAR programme, and we work with unemployed 16 to 24-year-olds who've all come from backgrounds that have created barriers to employment, and we help them to overcome those barriers and sustain work. We partner with churches around the UK, and we run a programme that lasts for a year altogether, but with a very intensive 6-week period at the beginning, and help them to get their minds set ready for work, thinking about their attitudes around work, what they believe about themselves and about their place in the world, and then helping them to navigate some of the sort of hidden rules of the working world that sometimes no one's shared with them, and yet they're being penalised for. It's been really interesting. We've been running Spear for 16 years now, and through that period there have been recessions and there's been austerity, and we've seen all kinds of highs and lows in the economy. Throughout that period, actually, the cohort that we work with has endured. We've definitely seen an increase in the sort of prevalence of serious youth violence over that 15-year period. I know when I started coaching 15 years ago, I don't think we had young people with a criminal record, but it was very unusual to have anyone who'd been stabbed, and certainly not perpetrators of stabbing. That's not uncommon now in our cohort on both sides of that equation. And we've lost a couple of young people to knife crime over the last 15 years, which has been a really tough time for us as an organisation. So I think in terms of advocacy, we've focused our attention on the business world. I think we feel that it's businesses that really do hold the key to changing the environment for young people particularly. For instance, there's a wealth management business in the city where 10% of their staff are Spear graduates. We try to de-risk that process for them by preparing our young people for employment, and then also preparing the businesses to receive those young people. So we deliver training to those businesses on how to manage young people well.
So far, Bringing Hope and Spear fall primarily but not exclusively into the individual camp described by Cornell West. What about XLP, one of London's largest Christian youth charities, and Power the Fight, an organisation that equips churches, youth groups and community organisations to engage with young people at risk?
The main thing we're trying to do is help young people from tough backgrounds to enter into positive futures. We do that through sports, through art, through music. We do schools work, we do mentoring work. So we do a whole range of different programs and projects. But the thing which kind of drives through the middle of all of them is about long-term relationship and walking with young people between the age of 10 and 20 to help them succeed in life, to help them do better, to help them get into work at the end of it, to help them contribute back into society. We've always felt very committed that you've got to be with young people for a long time, particularly kids who've come from tough backgrounds where they've been let down in the past, or they've not had that kind of consistent input from someone. So some of the estates we've been on for over a decade. Many of the youth workers who work here will live on those estates. So they're not just working with them through the projects, but actually they're working them through their lives. They see them out and about, they see them as they come out of school, they see them at the weekends. We work with about 53 schools around London, and we work specifically with their exclusion departments to help the young people to stay in school. Then we have a mentoring program. So the mentoring program specifically works with people who are either in gangs or on the edge of, kind of on the verge of entering a gang, or kids who've already been excluded. We have always been working in some of the deprived areas in London, and I think what we've seen through austerity is a lack of other interventions, or maybe just a scaling back of other interventions. So youth provision has dropped in many of the places we work. There's not the council youth workers there that there used to be. It depends more on people like us and other charities like us running their own kind of self-funded youth work in those areas. We have a voice at the table because of the work we do on the ground. We've had some kind of very key contacts within Parliament at times, which we've used and tried to lobby them and do what we can. I think we want to speak God's truth. We want to speak the truth of the young people, so really represent what's happening on the ground, represent the values that we believe that young people can be living up to. And I think that often goes against the short-term cycle of government and of politics.
How to Fight is something which came out of two murders which happened in South East London in 2016. We lost two young people within 6 months and what classically happened, churches were saying, what can we do? I've worked in this field for 20 years, youth offending services, community safety teams, charities, mental health charities. I've got a cohort of practitioners who are some of the best in the country. And I felt if we can train churches to be part of the solution, they're on the ground, they connect in with the communities, they have things which due to austerity we no longer have, buildings, resources and volunteers. If we could equip them, teaching them things such as county lines. What is county lines? What is contextual safeguarding? What is the difference around gender-based violence, around women and girls and that level of violence? What's the links between race and the law and the police? We have helped pay for funerals when there's been trials. We've supported families in that period of time. Sometimes people don't realise that trials can go on for like a month and not everybody's work is sympathetic for people taking time off. I do believe church groups are austerity free. I believe that when it comes to the storehouses of heaven, it's unlimited. And that has been shown over centuries. You know, the church has played a major part in so much of the youth work which has underpinned this country. I think we are in a time of austerity. I think you're even seeing funders not giving out as much money, but we have been blessed in a way where the church does seem to be supporting us and other people's work. What we are developing at the moment is a therapeutic service specifically which deals with young people and families who have been impacted by youth violence. And that, you'd think that exists, but not something which is very specific to the critical incidents of knife crime and youth violence and gang crime. Every workshop we've done, you would have parents sitting next to teachers, sitting next to police officers, sitting next to surgeons, sitting next to imams, sitting next to pastors, because we do not believe that this is one part of society's responsibility. It will require a societal response. But we also teach churches how they can speak truth to power individually. People can join the independent advisory groups, people can join their safer neighbourhood teams, people can write to their MPs and their councillors and legitimately ask, well, what is our strategy for serious youth violence in this particular borough?
It's clear that churches engage in a mixture of individual support and policy change, but they're not limited by the dictates of government. If the government can help, it's great, but governments come and go and their policies vary. Instead of relying on government, our church groups ground their vision for change in models from the Bible.
My theology is rooted in the Luke 4 verse 18 narrative, and I'll explain that. When Jesus said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me." I'm a Pentecostal. So there's something about my root in the Spirit of God. At the same time, I'm a practical theologian. That means that I cannot just say the Spirit of the Lord is upon me and he's anointed me. Look at the further bit of the text. It says to do something, to engage with poverty, to engage with marginalized people, to engage with people who are in prison.
In Jesus we see not only the command to go and love others as we love ourselves, but also the example of sacrifice. And that's something, I believe that without sacrifice we won't see change. So the example of sacrifice we see from Jesus, he gave everything, gave his life for those around him. And that's very much part of who we are as an organisation, wanting to be an organisation that sacrifices, whether that's our time, whether it's our energy, whether it's where we live, where we choose to live and choose to orientate our lives.
We see that in Isaiah 1, we see that in Micah. There's plenty of scriptures which encourage us to fight on behalf of the immigrant, fight on behalf of the widow, fight on behalf of the alien. You know, we're on the poor. We are to support that.
I did a rather unusual Bible study on Ecclesiastes and Lamentations in deciding whether or not to take this on, and I think I was struck by how often the Bible talks about how good it is for mankind, I'm assuming he meant women, for mankind to work, and how much dignity comes from finding the contribution you've got to make to the society you work in.
We set out to discover what the church was doing in response to serious youth violence. What we found is a mixture of individual empowerment and advocacy for policy change. Rather than being limited by austerity, they have a radical vision for individual and community transformation and are not totally dependent on government policy. While these organisations are austerity proof, the communities they serve are not. And if austerity is here to stay, can the church continue to bear the cost?